How is it going, Bears fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Bear Down podcast, where we talk everything Bears every day of the week. Today, we are back. Had to take a little bit of time off after the game yesterday, but we are back reacting to the Bears' 16-13 loss at home at the hands of the Baltimore Ravens yesterday. We're going to be sharing our thoughts on the game. Obviously, as a lot of you want us to, we're going to be talking a little bit about the future of the team and the coaching staff as well. So be sure to tune in until the end, and we're going to be talking about everything that will spiral out from the loss yesterday. Before I introduce myself and my co-hosts, I would like to say short week this week, so we're going to be having videos come out every day, a double upload today, and more content tomorrow. We said it at the beginning of the season. We want to post the most comprehensive Bears coverage on the web, regardless of how the team is doing. So wherever you may be listening right now, YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, we're going to be posting Bears Lions content starting tonight. So drop a like, follow, subscribe, and we'll be bringing you guys more Bears content for the rest of the season. I am your host, Chris Malpe, today back in Illinois with my co-host to talk about what was a pretty putrid loss yesterday. I'm joined by Parth Shaw. Parth, feels good to be back in the burbs. How you doing?
Yeah, it definitely feels good to be back in the burbs. Just some time with the family. It's exciting always. But yeah, depressing loss yesterday. Definitely didn't want to record right after that. I felt like I needed a day or a night to just rethink and just let my emotions die down a little bit. Because yeah, there's a lot to be talked about. Wasn't a good game at all from the Bears at all, offensively, even defensively at the end of the game. But yeah, it's nice to be back in the Chicago suburbs for sure, though.
Yeah, and I guess one of
Your
the more
dogs are
annoying
back
things
too.
about
Yeah.
being, I was going to say, I am in a quiet room back at college, but I've got the dogs here. They're probably barking because they're pissed as Matt Nagy as we are. But yeah, not the greatest outcome you could have asked for yesterday. The Bears should have won that game against what ended up being a backup quarterback and got simply outcoached by John Harbaugh, one of the best to do it, a future Hall of Famer. Justin Fields goes down with bruised ribs. He's out for what seems to be 1 to 2 weeks now. I'd be really, really surprised if he was able to play next week against the Lions. But let's dive into this loss a little bit and first take a look at the box score. The Ravens moved to 7-3, first in the AFC North. They are 3-2 on the road now. The Bears moved to 3-7 and are 2-3 at home. As I mentioned earlier, Baltimore with a backup quarterback coming in, Tyler Snoop Huntley. His first career start, he was 26 for 36, 219 yards, 6.1 yards per pass, no touchdowns, 1 interception. He was sacked 6 times and had a passer rating of 76. On the ground for Baltimore, Devonta Freeman led the way. He had a pretty solid day, 16 carries for 49 yards and a score, 3.1 yards per carry for him. Huntley also carried the ball 7 times for 40 yards. In the receiving game for Baltimore, not much really happened. I think the only player that really made an impact was Mark Andrews. He had 8 catches for 73 yards, 9.1 yards per catch. Sammy Watkins had 3 catches for 48 yards, one of them being a long dagger at the end of the game, a 29-yard catch on 3rd and 12 to put Baltimore in scoring range with about 30 seconds left in the game. Not much for Baltimore defensively. I'm not really going to jump into that. I believe Justin Fields was only sacked 3 times, actually twice, with Dalton being sacked once. But taking a look at Chicago's stats for this one, Justin Fields, who started the game, not the greatest game for him. He had a couple of drops, a couple of missed throws. He was 4 for 11, 79 yards, 7.2 yards per pass, sacked twice with a rating of 62.3. Andy Dalton coming in backup mode, played a pretty good game. I got to be honest. He was 11 for 23, 201 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 8.7 yards per pass, sacked once with a passer rating of 107.3. Dalton looked pretty good. First drive he came in, the Bears scored on 2 plays when they threw a bubble screen to Darnell Mooney, and he absolutely ripped through the defense. And then the 4th and 11 completion to Marquise Goodwin. With the game on the line, Dalton chucked it up. Goodwin did a good job at creating separation to put the Bears back on top. That was absolutely huge when they got up 13-9 there. On the ground for Chicago, David Montgomery, an okay day. I think the Bears, and Parth will probably agree with me once we get around to it, abandoned the run a little bit too early in this one. Montgomery, 14 carries for 58 yards, 4.1 yards per carry. I know at the end of the first half, he was averaging 6 yards per carry, and they weren't going to him enough. But, the Baltimore defense is pretty good against the run. They've been averaging holding opponents to 88 rushing yards per game. Chicago had a combined 92. Taking a look at Chicago's receiving, actually a really good day for two Bears receivers. Darnell Mooney, 5 catches, 121 yards, and a touchdown, 25 yards per catch with a long of 60. Marquise Goodwin broke through finally for the Bears, his first 100-yard receiving game. 4 catches, 104 yards, 26 yards per catch, a touchdown with that 49-yard touchdown within 2 minutes. For Chicago, Jimmy Graham had his second and third catches of the season. Fields fumbled once and lost it when the Bears looked like they were getting some momentum and ended up bruising those ribs, as I mentioned. Taking a look at Chicago defensively, there's really only three players, I guess, to highlight. Number one, Roquan Smith, easily his best game of the year yesterday. Had 11 tackles in the first half, ended with 17 and 2 tackles for a loss. Robert Quinn, my goodness gracious, with Khalil Mack down, someone needed to step up. He had himself a day. 5 tackles, 3.5 sacks, and a strip sack for Quinn. He's looking like he could possibly make a push on Dent there at the top of the list for the Bears' all-time leading sack leaders. Great game for him. He only continues to play better. Travis Gibson also added a sack, and Tashawn Gibson added an interception on quite the athletic play there for Chicago. So Parth, taking a look at this stat sheet, it doesn't look all that bad. The Bears offense was pretty stagnant throughout this game outside of 2 really big plays. The Bears defense was solid, I would say, for the most part until they needed to be at the end.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on this Week 11 loss?
It kind of felt like this repeat game of the Steelers. The offense couldn't get it going until, I guess this week it was until Andy Dalton came in, but last week against the Steelers, we couldn't get it going until the fourth quarter. The offense definitely needs to start producing more, quicker. I think they got to come out faster, and they're not able to. We saw that this week. The Bears weren't able to move the ball at all. David Montgomery wasn't utilized as much, which I was a little bit surprised. Knowing that the Bears were only down by 6 points for most of the game, I was surprised that we weren't able to use Montgomery more. I felt like the Bears were getting dominated time of possession-wise, especially in the first half. The only reason the Baltimore Ravens had that lead was because they dominated the snap count, and that's why the Bears, I felt like they got outplayed. It wasn't much of an outplayed game. I felt like the Bears just didn't control the ball as much. The 2 times we scored, they were both big plays. So for a team to have those wins and be sustainable, you got to have long drives where you drain out the clock, run the ball, and score that touchdown. The Bears weren't able to do that, and that explains why we lost this game. Again, the defense, when it comes down to get the job done, they weren't able to, and it hurt. It definitely hurt. Can't speak much about the defense though. They're playing their butts off. Robert Quinn, 3.5 sacks. That puts the sack total at 10 this year. The leading sack, I think for the Bears is 17.5. Richard Dent. So
Yep.
we still have 7 games to go. I think Robert Quinn could climb up those charts pretty easily, especially with the way he's been playing recently. And Roquan Smith, 13 solo tackles. An absolute baller of a game from one of the best linebackers in the league. Definitely does not get enough credit for what he does. Us Bears fans know how good he is, but outside of us Bears fans, he definitely does not get that Pro Bowl recognition or that All-Pro recognition that he deserves. Hopefully he does this year, especially on a Bears team that won't have that many bright spots for sure.
Yeah, I'll start defensively where you left off. I thought it was a pretty good game for Chicago defensively. Obviously, Robert Quinn was an absolute game wrecker and did absolutely everything he could. Once again, I gotta bring him up too. Roquan Smith, man, put him in the Pro Bowl this year.
Yeah.
Give him All-Pro nominations. I know coming into the game, he was 4th in the league in tackles with 93. You'd assume getting up to 110 now, that's got to jump him up the list at least a spot. So a great game for him. But you mentioned it. The one thing that the Baltimore Ravens did well is control the time of possession. They had the ball for 38 minutes and 50 seconds during this game. Chicago only had the ball for barely over 20 minutes. Baltimore got to the red zone 3 times, were able to get points every time down, I believe. And Chicago was 0 for 1 in the red zone. So defensively, not a terrible game. It's just disappointing. Football is a game of inches, and I can't really bash the defense. The Bears defense has been so good for quite some time. And I think I can confidently say that the defense wasn't good yesterday. I don't know if I can entirely put the blame on them though. But if you take a look at Chicago's last 3 games, San Francisco scored late to win the game. The Steelers scored late to go up, and then the Bears didn't have enough time to get back. Baltimore scored late, and the Bears didn't have enough time offensively to get back in it. So, the defense normally has been don't break, but in these last 3 games, when it mattered the most at the end of the game, they couldn't make a stop. And maybe if they could, we could be sitting here right now looking at a 6-4 Bears team with a completely different outlook. So Chicago falls to 3-7. The defense isn't what we've seen in years past, and it's a little underwhelming. Offensively, I mentioned it earlier. I think they abandoned the run a little bit too early, which is unfortunate because statistically, Chicago is one of the best run teams in the league. Not only do they hand the ball off a ton, but they put themselves in situations in the run game where they should be able to put up points, and they're not able to. The play calling still doesn't make sense to me. I remember on the one drive where the Bears got to the red zone, it was their first offensive drive of the game. Justin Fields had a beautiful downfield throw to Darnell Mooney, and then Matt Nagy says, "Hey, let's roll out the Wildcat. Let's roll out the Wildcat and put David Montgomery under center. If it ain't broke, you don't fix it." And we'll get to Nagy a little bit later. But he's one of the worst offensive play callers in the league, if not the worst. I'd probably say he's the worst. Whoever was calling plays yesterday, it was terrible. Sloppy all over. Jason Peters, even though the Bears did score a touchdown on the last drive, offensively, he's someone who's played more snaps than anyone on the field on both sides. Had a false start there. And then after they score the touchdown and everyone knows you're going to go for 2, the Bears needlessly burn a timeout. It's undisciplined football. It's not going to win you games against good teams like Baltimore, even without Lamar Jackson. So offensively, not the greatest game. I was happy that some of the receivers were able to get going, but it was too little too late at the end. Once again, Chicago's offense just can't get kicking until it seems like a comeback is a little bit too far out of reach. So overall, not the greatest game, and it's tough to talk about it. But let's move on to the next point here with the future of the team. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the game against the Lions later tonight, and we're still going to stay in present mode. But now at 3-7, with the season being practically over, I think it is time to take a look at the offseason and what's going to happen moving forward. And I hate to phrase it this way. I only am because I don't think the Bears are a team. The McCaskies aren't people that go about firing head coaches in the middle of the season. Maybe if we lose to the Lions, it would happen. But Parth, in your mind, and you understand what I'm saying by this question, is Matt Nagy done in Chicago? Would you say that Nagy is a dead man walking for these next 5 weeks?
Absolutely. It's tough. He's been a great coach for the Bears, especially because he's been able to make the playoffs, something the past head coaches weren't able to do. But, this offense just has so much potential. This team just has way too much potential for Matt Nagy to still be the head coach of this team. We've seen that because of him, I feel like we're playing a little bit worse than we could have been. This offense hasn't been able to reach its potential. Whenever we hired Nagy, we were expecting the offense to do better. If anything, it's gotten worse. Guys like David Montgomery aren't able to play up to their full potential. Guys like Allen Robinson, Darnell Mooney, Justin Fields is also being held back. There's just a lot of players being held back on the offensive side of the ball for Matt Nagy to still be the coach for the Chicago Bears. If you look at his first year with the Bears in 2018, the most successful year he had was when Vic Fangio was here, and the defense was one of the best in the league. That 2018 Bears defense was honestly carrying Matt Nagy's record. That man is not supposed to have over 500 record in the National Football League as a head coach. That season is literally just carrying his mark. The Bears are 0-5 in their last 5 games. No changes have been made. It's the same stuff out there every week. I'm surprised he's still the head coach of the Chicago Bears. This is me trying to be clear, uncut with you guys. If the Bears do lose next week against the Detroit Lions on Thursday, I hope to God he is canned. I don't think he deserves to coach the team if we lose against the Lions, especially because they have 0 wins. You have to win that game.
Yeah.
Especially what I saw this week. You can't lose to a backup quarterback, and he managed to do that somehow.
He's done that in 3 of his 4 years too. Brock Osweiler, Teddy Bridgewater, and now Tyler Huntley. Coming out of a bye, Matt Nagy's lost to a backup quarterback
3 times.
75%.
And he's 0-4 after a bye week also as a head coach. So there's a lot of things that need to be reevaluated. I'm still surprised, like many Bears fans. The Soldier Field broke out in chants, fire Nagy after the game yesterday, and that's due to no surprise. I hope McCaskey was there. I saw it on TV. I hope she heard it, because the fans aren't happy, and when the product on the field is not good, I don't think the fans should be spending any money on this team. So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and agree with you. And I think that the Bears should fire Matt Nagy. And we'll get into it in just a second, and we'll talk about it later on in the offseason because it's a little bit more of an interesting conversation. But we'll talk about Ryan Pace as well. But I think the Bears need to fire Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace after the Lions game, regardless of the outcome. I think it's time for the Bears to move on, not essentially because a coaching change could spark them. They're 3-7. But it has to do with the team's expectations, the team's standards. And I think Chicago's already wasted enough time waiting and seeing. And there's not enough really much to see later. So you can't accept this level of incompetence and poor coaching and indisciplined football and expect to be taken seriously in the National Football League. So I'm going to go ahead and say I think the Bears should move on from Nagy without a doubt. I think it should happen on Thursday night. The only reason I'm saying I don't think it should happen now is because it's a short week. But even if we win and go to 4-7, I'm still going to be calling for him to get fired. And I absolutely think that Matt Nagy is a dead man walking. Let's move into our last point before we close this one out. A little bit of a shorter one here, Parth. We're going to have conversations about Ryan Pace in the upcoming weeks. And after week 17, we're going to have a lot of time to move into off-season mode. And talk about what's happening with the Bears moving forward. Obviously, no first-round pick next year. A lot of players to reevaluate to possibly create some cap space, and the team won't be in the playoffs. So we're going to be back in off-season mode before we know it. But taking a look at some of the other Bears staff members, Bill Lazor, Sean Desai, Ryan Pace, do you think Chicago, outside of firing Nagy, should look to clear house this offseason?
Absolutely. Outside of Matt Nagy, I mean, Ryan Pace hasn't done much in the last couple of years. The player development from the other coaches' side has been pretty poor. If you look at the players he's brought in, it's been pretty poor. The Bears have Kendall Vildor starting at cornerback too still, and still haven't
Don't
been
get
able.
me started. Don't get me started.
I know. I'm just trying to say that Ryan Pace coming to the season, I don't know what he was thinking. It's just you can't put 6th-round cornerbacks at your starting cornerback position. You can't come into this. Ryan Pace, he's been here for he's been here for a very long time. Not much has changed. He was given the chance to bring in Matt Nagy, and I thought that was it. I don't think things were going to get better. I thought that's when the Bears made the right decision to hire Nagy, and Pace and Nagy would have taken this team to the next level. But things just haven't gone that way. I don't trust Ryan Pace to hire another head coach. I don't trust him going to the draft next year. I hope the Bears clear house for sure. I think it makes the most sense, especially when you're trying to bring in a new head coach. I think that a new GM should be able to pick his new head coach. I think the hand-picked guys. If that means Sean Desai is gone, that means Sean Desai is gone. If that means Bill Lazor's gone, Bill Lazor's gone. I think all these guys need to be at least canned, or at least told that they can be canned. Even Sean Desai, even though it's his first year.
Yeah, I think everything should be on the line for Chicago. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's about dignity. It's about standards. It's about the expectations you want the fans to have and the players in the locker room to have. And that's why I think that, Nagy should be fired on Thursday night. I don't think the Bears want the locker room that they're about to have in a couple of weeks if this continues to spiral downhill. So I think everyone's job should be on the line. I think Bill Lazor definitely gone as offensive coordinator. I could see a situation where you keep Desai around. I think the Bears defense is in a tough position, not having players like Khalil Mack, Akeem Hicks, and Eddie Jackson out on the field consistently. But, I think everyone's job should be on the line. Luckily in Chicago, I still believe that there's a bright future. Justin Fields has shown it to us. I think we have some good pieces on both sides of the ball. But Ryan Pace is a completely different discussion that will be had for another day. I personally have liked him as a drafter. The Bears still lead the league in paying veterans on the defensive side of the ball, while Pace did focus a little bit more on the offense last offseason. Some changes are going to be have to be made because Justin Fields still has no time in the pocket. Allen Robinson's going to be gone after the season, and Chicago's going to have a lot to reevaluate and hopefully have a new regime. So thank you guys for tuning into our Week 11 post-game show. Once again, we're going to be bringing you guys Bears-Lions content tonight, taking a look at the winless Lions before the Bears head into their next game in Week 12 on Thanksgiving Day. If you want more Bears content from us, though, be sure to drop a like, subscribe, follow wherever you may be listening. We're trying to post the most comprehensive Bears coverage on the web for the rest of the regular season, even if the tone does get a little bit negative every once in a while. If you want more content, head to our website, beardown.com. If you'd like to find the podcast on Instagram and Twitter, you can find it on both platforms at Bear Down. And finally, you can find the links to our personal social media pages down in the description for myself as well as Parth. Our Instagram and Twitter pages were active on both platforms. It's another great way to interact with us, and you can hear our thoughts on all things Bears, the National Football League, and the entirety of Chicago sports. Parshaw, the Bulls won last night. Another good win for them. I believe they moved to 12-5, first in the Eastern Conference right now. I needed that just for my sanity's sake. But any last words before we sign off?
Might watch some football tonight. I haven't watched any football after that Bears game, so I just needed some time off yesterday. That loss took a lot out of me, especially 2 back-to-back weeks. Those heartbreaking losses hurt the most. But excited for next week, or this Thursday, I guess. 11:30 kickoff. Watch it with the family on Thanksgiving, so it should be a great time. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you guys, and bear down.
Yeah, I think I only watch for fantasy football purposes nowadays. It's all that really matters. But I do have Leonard Fournette tonight. I've got Saquon in another league, so I will be tuning in. But yeah, I'm excited to be back consistently now that we finally have some free time back home. It feels right to be home and back recording for you guys, and we're going to keep pushing out the content as long as you guys keep supporting. So thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a pleasure to be your host once again. My name is Chris Malpe, and Bears fans, as always, do us a favor and stay safe and bear down. Happy Thanksgiving. Bears Lions content coming this week. That's pretty much it for us. We'll see you later tonight. Peace out.